In the bone-chilling darkness of Montana, $2 lay ice-cold in the palm of a man's hand. Savage laughter erupted from the wooden hall down the valley, like a pack of wolves tearing into prey. Then, suddenly, it all fell silent. A tall woman, broad-shouldered like a barn door, stepped into the flickering lantern light. She did not bow her head. She did not tremble. She simply stood there, taller than every man in the room, staring at the floorboards as if hiding a fire fierce enough to burn the entire place down. No one made an offer, not a single sound. Only the howling wind outside the windows and the pounding heart of a man standing in the darkest corner, gripping those $2 so tightly the metal cut into his skin. He stepped forward. The entire room exploded with mocking laughter, but he didn't stop. And she lifted her head. Their eyes met across a sea of hostile faces, like two red-hot irons striking for the first time on the anvil. Something had just begun, and it could no longer be stopped. The coins were cold. That was the first thing Elias Holt noticed when he reached into his pocket that night. Standing alone in the dark field behind his cabin, wind cutting down from the mountains, like it had a personal grievance with him specifically, like it had traveled all that way just to find him standing in the dark doing something stupid. $2. He turned them over in his palm, once, twice. The metal caught no light because there was no light to catch. Just the dark and the cold and the distant sound of 38 goats, making their opinions known from the pen. 8 years in Montana. 8 years of fixing fence posts and hauling water and talking to 38 goats like they were people, because sometimes they were the only ones who listened without judgment. 8 years of fighting clay soil and early frost, and a roof that leaked in exactly 3 spots every single time it rained. 3 spots. Same 3 spots every single time. He'd patched them. He'd repaired them. He'd stood on that roof in July heat and told himself this time it would hold. It never held. $2, that was what 8 years added up to when you subtracted everything else. The debts. The losses. The 3 years since Clara walked out the door with 2 trunks and a look on her face that was worse than anger. Disappointment. The kind that had stopped expecting anything and was simply confirming what it already knew. He should have gone back inside. Should have made coffee and gone to sleep and stopped standing in a field at 9 o'clock at night, having a philosophical argument with himself about coins that weren't going to multiply, no matter how long he stared at them. The goats had their own thoughts on the matter. Old Bessie could be heard from the pen, offering commentary in the dark. Elias had owned her for 8 years, and she had never, in all that time, failed to have an opinion about something. He thought about the auction. Had been thinking about it, on and off, for 3 days. Ever since Ignacio mentioned it at the feed store, in that casual way that men mention things they want you to think they are not invested in. 6 women coming in on the morning train, looking for husbands. Montana husbands, Ignacio had said, like Montana husbands were a specific category of thing that required distinction from other kinds. Elias had said nothing about it, had thought about it every day since. The thinking was not comfortable. He was 35 years old. He had been married once, which had not ended well, which had taught him several things about himself that he would have preferred not to know. 3 years alone in this cabin with 38 goats and a leaking roof had taught him other things. About the specific weight of silence when it is your only companion. About the way a person can be physically present in their own life while being somehow absent from it. He had been absent. He knew this. Clara had known it first, which was fair. Because she had been the one standing in the same room with the absence every day, he should have gone back inside, except the auction was tomorrow. And he was going anyway. Not to bid. Absolutely not to bid. He had no money to bid it and no good reason to bid, and every sensible instinct he possessed was loudly, unanimously, categorically against bidding. He was going to watch. That was all. A man could watch things. Watching was free, and maybe watching would remind him of why he had stopped trying to want certain things, which was itself useful information. He closed his fingers around the coins. They were cold the whole walk back to the cabin. He set them on the mantel shelf where the money jar sat nearly empty and looked at them for a moment in the firelight. $2. The emergency fund, the buffer between him and complete catastrophe. The thing that was not supposed to be touched. He left them there, went to sleep, did not sleep particularly well. Silver Falls in 1873 was the kind of town that smelled like ambition and disappointment in equal measure. Sawdust and horse manure and the particular desperation of men who had come west expecting one thing and found something considerably less. The main street had 6 buildings that could be called permanent and twice that many that were optimistic about the word temporary. A bank that had been there 8 years and looked slightly surprised about it. A hotel that charged reasonable rates and provided unreasonable mattresses. A general store with a proprietor who knew everyone's business and distributed this knowledge on a need-to-know basis that was substantially broader than most people would have preferred. The auction hall was not a permanent building. It was a large room rented from the lodge on the 3rd Wednesday of every month when the mail-order bride company ran their introductions. The company called them introductions. Everyone else called them what they were. The hall sat between the feed store and the saloon, which felt intentional somehow. The geography of hope and the geography of consolation, right there together for convenience. Elias arrived early enough to claim his spot in the back corner. Hat pulled low, shoulders folded inward, a man doing his level best to disappear into wood paneling. He had been doing this most of his adult life, occupying the edges of rooms, taking up exactly the space required and no more. He was not here to bid. He was absolutely not here to bid. Chester Doyle ran the proceedings. Chester was a soft man in his 50s who had clearly already visited the saloon next door at least twice before noon. His face was the particular shade of red that comes from a complicated and long-standing relationship with whiskey. He kept his paperwork in 3 different stacks and shuffled between them with the focused confusion of someone who had forgotten what he was looking for but remained committed to the search. "Gentlemen," Chester announced, with the enthusiasm of a man announcing a minor municipal meeting, "we have 6 fine ladies joining us today from the East. Fine ladies, looking for good, honest husbands. Montana husbands." Someone in the crowd cheered. Someone else told him to sit down. The first 5 went quickly. Elias watched with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, and the uncomfortable feeling of a man observing something he could not quite name as wrong, but could not quite name as right either. A young blonde woman in a blue dress, $240. A German widow with capable hands and steady eyes, $300 even. The blacksmith who took her looked genuinely pleased, which was the most honest thing that happened all afternoon. A school teacher from Ohio who looked like she had not slept in a week. A widow from Pennsylvania with 3 children she did not mention until the papers were signed. Money on the table. Papers signed. Done. Like buying furniture, like buying very expensive, very uncomfortable, very human furniture that had its own history and its own grief and its own reasons for being here that had nothing to do with anyone's convenience. Elias kept his hands in his pockets. Then Chester shuffled his papers into the wrong stack again, hesitated, looked toward the side door with an expression that managed to be both apologetic and bracing at the same time. "And our final, our last." "Ah," he cleared his throat. "Miss Ingrid Voss." of Copenhagen, Denmark. Age 26, the side door opened and the room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of anticipation, the other kind. She was tall. God. She was tall, had to be 6'2" at minimum, and Elias was not a small man, and she would have come up past his chin with room to spare. Her shoulders were broad in a way that the word broad did not quite cover. That required a different word that did not exist yet in his vocabulary. Her hands, hanging at her sides, were the hands of someone who had done real work for real years and had not apologized for it. Calloused, strong. The knuckles of her right hand had a small scar running diagonal across them that looked old and had clearly mattered at the time. Her dress did not fit. Too short in the sleeves by 2 inches at least. Too tight across the shoulders in a way that suggested the garment had been purchased when she was younger or smaller or both, and kept because there had not been money or occasion for another. The dark blonde hair was pulled back so severely it made her face look angular, stark. The kind of face that would have been called handsome if she had been a man, and was being called something else entirely by the murmurs already starting in the crowd. She kept her eyes on the floor, not because she was ashamed. Elias understood that difference from the inside. He had been ashamed of things, and he knew what ashamed looked like in a body. This was not that. She was simply refusing to give the room the satisfaction of seeing her expression while it decided what it thought of her. Withholding, not surrendering. He recognized it the way you recognize a piece of music you heard once years ago. Not quite remembering the name, but knowing it somewhere before your brain catches up to the knowing. Chester tried. Bless Chester Doyle, who was not a bad man, only a weak one. He actually tried. Miss Voss is educated, speaks 3 languages, excellent with her hands. She's traveled all the way from Denmark, which is quite a journey. She's looking for a good, built like a barn door. Someone called from the middle of the crowd Lotta. The rolling kind that feeds itself. The kind that starts with one person and pulls others in because it is easier to laugh than to feel the discomfort underneath the laugh. Ingrid Voss did not flinch. She just kept looking at the floor. Jaw set. Breathing even and deliberate and controlled in its evenness. The breathing of a person who has decided in advance to breathe evenly and is executing that decision with precision. Ah. Well, Chester shuffled his papers into the wrong stack again. Shall we start at $100? 100 for this fine. Silence 75. More silence. The aggressive kind. The kind that has a texture, $50. Gentlemen. Surely someone coughed. Someone else studied the ceiling with sudden profound interest. A man near the front actually turned his chair slightly, as if he could become geometrically uninvolved in what was happening. Chester was sweating now, visibly. $25. Come now. She speaks 3 languages. She's educated. Does she cook? Can she sew anything that fits her? Can she fit through a standard door frame is what I want to know. The laughter again, louder. Rolling through the room like water, finding the path of least resistance. And something in Ingrid Voss's shoulders, just barely. Just the smallest possible compression. Like something was landing somewhere soft and specific, and the body could not entirely prevent the acknowledgement of it. Each second of silence landing, each laugh landing, like small stones dropped on the same spot. Elias felt the 2 coins in his pocket. He thought, don't. He thought, you have exactly nothing. You have a leaking roof and 38 goats and 90 days before Warren Crane arrives to collect $600 you do not have and take everything you have spent 8 years building. And spending your last $2 on a stranger at an auction is the single most idiotic, most irresponsible, most completely indefensible thing you could possibly. She raised her eyes, just for a second, just long enough. And he saw what was there, not defeat. Not quite yet. She had not given up. This was something worse and more complicated than defeat. This was the very last remaining edge of hope. The part that survives everything until it finally doesn't. The part that was still looking out at a room full of men who were laughing and still searching for one face that was not. He had worn that expression 3 years ago, standing alone in the kitchen after Clara walked out the door for the last time. He had looked in the mirror above the wash basin and seen exactly that, the last edge of it, the part that keeps looking even when it knows better. Going once, Chester said. His voice had gone very quiet. Elias's hand was already moving. He did not make a decision. Not in any conscious, deliberate sense. He did not weigh options or calculate outcomes or consider consequences. He did not do any of the rational, measured things a sane man does before committing to something irreversible. His hand moved and his mouth opened, and the words came out before his brain had finished forming the thought behind them. $2. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the room exploded. Not in anger. In hilarity. The helpless, rolling kind of hilarity that is also, underneath, if you listen carefully, faintly horrified at itself. Did he say $2? 2 actual dollars. Holt has completely lost his. Mountain man buys himself a mountain. Ha, more laughter. Then someone repeating the number to someone who hadn't heard, and that person laughing, and the laugh spreading outward through the room like something dropped in a pond. Elias did not look at any of them. Not because he was embarrassed. Not because the laughter bothered him in any structural way. But because the only face in the room that mattered was the one on the platform, and he was looking at it, and he could not afford to look away and miss what was happening there. He was looking at Ingrid Voss. And she was looking back at him, and for 3 full seconds neither of them moved or blinked or breathed at a normal rate. He had expected, if he'd thought about it, which he hadn't had time to think about it, relief on her face. Relief and maybe embarrassment. The complicated embarrassment of being rescued in a humiliating way by a man you have never met who has just made himself the object of public ridicule on your behalf. That was not what was there. Her expression was not gratitude. It was something more complicated and more honest than gratitude. Like someone who had been underwater for a long time and had just broken the surface and was trying to determine whether the air was real before they allowed themselves to breathe it. Provisional, careful, wanting to believe and not quite daring to yet. The laughter was still going. Around them, past them, between them. She did not look away from him. He did not look away from her. The laughter did not matter. It had its moment, and then it was behind them both, receding as he walked forward through the crowd toward the table and the papers, and the $2 silver he was about to put down on the wood. Chester sputtered. His face cycled through approximately 4 different shades of red. Now, see here, Graves. Holt. She's a person. The minimum, the reserve price, is it enough or not? Elias said. His voice came out steadier than he felt, which was useful. Chester looked at the empty cash box, looked at the crowd, looked at Ingrid, who was still looking at Elias, looked back at his 3 stacks of papers that were now thoroughly in the wrong order. The organizers took a commission. Even $2 was $2 more than nothing, which is what they would get if the woman went unclaimed. Going once, Chester said. The words came out thin and resigned. Nobody moved. Going twice. The only sound was wind against the windows and the distant complaint of a horse outside. Sold. Chester slumped in a way that suggested something structural had left his spine. To Elias Holt. For $2. God help you both. Elias walked forward through the crowd. It parted for him the way crowds part, when they have not quite decided what they are witnessing. He reached the table and pulled the 2 silver coins from his pocket, set them down on the wood with a sound that was clean and final, the sound of a decision made and paid for, looked up. Ingrid Voss was 3 feet away. Up close, she was even taller than she had appeared on the platform. Her eyes were dark brown, with faint flecks of amber in them that caught the light from the side window, and there were fine lines of exhaustion around those eyes that spoke of a very long journey and probably insufficient food at any point during it. Her hands were still at her sides, but they had relaxed slightly from the tight control of the last half hour. Just slightly, she was looking at him the way you look at a problem you have not yet solved, searching for the mechanism, the part that makes it make sense. "The clause she has not found yet, ma'am," he said, and touched the brim of his hat. She said nothing, just kept looking, calculating. The papers took 15 minutes. Elias read every word, every clause, every piece of language that attempted to dress something uncomfortable in the vocabulary of civilization. He signed where required, with the steady hand of a man who has already accepted what he is doing and does not need to hesitate over the documentation of it. He held out the pen. She stared at it. "You have to sign too," he said. "If you want to." "If I want to," she repeated it back at him. Her voice was low and accented and surprisingly clear, the accent of someone who had learned English precisely as a formal language rather than a native one. "That's an interesting way to put it. You don't have to. If you'd rather find different arrangements, Mr. Holt." She picked up the pen. "My other arrangements consisted of 2 dresses, a trunk that is falling apart at the hinges, and 43 cents. So let's not pretend there are alternatives here worth considering." She signed her name in precise, clean script. Ingrid Helene Voss. A pause, a breath, then she added Holt at the end, just like that, without discussion, without ceremony. The name written and the decision behind it, made in the same moment. Elias looked at it for a moment. Ingrid Helene Voss Holt. Then he looked away, before he could think too carefully about what it meant that she had done that without being asked. Chester Doyle shuffled paperwork into the wrong stack one more time and handed them each a copy with the air of a man who has discharged a difficult duty and intends to visit the saloon within the next 15 minutes. Elias folded his copy and put it in his coat pocket. Ingrid folded hers with precise corners and placed it somewhere inside her trunk. The other men in the hall had mostly dispersed. 2 or 3 lingered near the door with the specific posture of people who are not quite ready to stop watching something, but aren't quite willing to admit that is what they are doing. Ingrid did not look at any of them. Elias did, briefly. The kind of look that says, "The show is finished." The look was received, and the remaining men found reasons to be elsewhere within the minute. "Your trunk," he said. "Where is it?" "Against the wall there. The brown one." It was a single trunk, small, battered at the corners in a way that suggested it had made several difficult journeys and was not quite sure it would survive another. He picked it up. It weighed almost nothing. Everything she owned in the world, everything she had carried across an ocean and a continent, in a trunk that weighed almost nothing. He carried it to the wagon without comment. She walked beside him. Neither of them spoke until they were outside in the afternoon light. Warren Crane was waiting outside. Of course he was. The man had a gift for positioning himself exactly where he was least wanted, and he exercised this gift with the cheerful consistency of someone who had never once been made uncomfortable by his own presence. He sat on a horse that was worth more than everything Elias owned. He wore a suit that was worth more than the horse. He was perhaps 52, clean-shaven, the kind of handsome that comes from never having worried seriously about money. His eyes were a pleasant shade of gray that had nothing pleasant beside them. "Holt," he said, warmly, like they were old friends who had always been delighted by each other. "Heard you made quite the purchase in there." Crane's gaze moved to Ingrid with the brief, categorizing efficiency of a man assessing something in terms of its practical value to him. Whatever conclusion he reached registered as nothing worth registering. $2. He shook his head in what appeared to be admiration. "Have to respect a man who knows his budget." Elias picked up the reins. "You want something specific, or are you just providing commentary?" "Just a friendly reminder. The lease payment, $600. 90 days from today," Crane smiled pleasantly. "I know things have been tight." And now, with an additional expense to consider, Ingrid spoke. Not loudly. Very conversationally, actually. Like she was discussing weather. "He doesn't want the lease payment." Both men looked at her. She was looking at Crane with the same flat, measuring expression she had aimed at the auction room, and then at Elias, and now at this new problem, the expression of someone making an accurate assessment. "He wants the land," she said. "The lease payment is the mechanism. If you cannot pay, he takes the land. The payment is not the point. The land is the point." Crane's pleasant smile did not move. But something behind it made a small, careful adjustment. "Smart woman," he said. "For what she cost," Elias's hands tightened on the reins until the leather bit into his palms. Ingrid said nothing, did not react visibly, just kept watching Crane with those amber-flecked eyes in the particular way of someone who is filing information for later use. 90 days, Crane repeated pleasantly, and wheeled his horse and rode off down the main street, leaving a small cloud of dust that dissipated before they did. They sat in silence for a moment. "What does he want with the land?" Ingrid asked. "Calm, practical, timber, old-growth pine on the north slope. Worth considerable money in California right now, and if you can't pay, he takes it. Gets the timber for the cost of whatever this lease agreement actually is, which I have my doubts about." She was quiet. "Processing. How much do you have?" "Not counting the $2 I just spent." "Yes." "Nothing." She nodded once. Slowly. The nod of a person confirming information they had already suspected. "Then we should go," she said. "We have work to do." The ranch arrived in the late afternoon light, which was the most flattering possible light for it, and even so, the cabin leaned slightly to the right. Not dramatically. Just enough that you noticed and then found you could not unnotice. The roof had patches in 3 places, visible from the road, each patch a slightly different color from the original shingles, in a way that catalogued the years of repair attempts. One shutter hung at an angle that had clearly given up on the concept of vertical as a personal aspiration. The barn sagged leftward, which at least meant the cabin and barn were leaning toward each other, which Elias had at various lonely moments told himself gave the property a certain cohesion. He did not share this observation. The goat pen had gaps where posts had rotted through and not been replaced. The garden had not been tended in longer than he would prefer to admit. An old stone forge sat beside the barn, its surfaces gray with weather and old ash, wearing several seasons of neglect like a coat it had long since stopped being able to take off. Ingrid looked at all of it from the wagon seat. She did not say anything for a long moment. He sat beside her and waited for whatever the verdict would be and tried to prepare himself for it. He had been preparing himself for it the whole ride home, working through the various things she might say and the responses he would give. Trying to be ready, she was not looking at it the way a woman looks at a disappointment. She was looking at it the way she looked at most things, with assessment rather than judgment. The eyes of someone who wants to understand what something actually is, rather than decide in advance what to think about it. "It has walls," she said finally. "It does. And a roof, mostly." A pause. the quality of a pause in which something has been considered and set aside. That's more than I had this morning. She climbed down from the wagon before he could offer a hand, moving with the easy physical confidence of someone accustomed to managing their own considerable height and reach. She stood in the dirt yard and looked around with those assessing eyes, taking inventory of what was there rather than mourning what wasn't. I'll take the barn tour later. I want to see the forge first. It hasn't been used in years. The man who owned the property before me was a blacksmith, but I never learned. I'm not. She was already walking toward it. He followed, feeling the particular mixture of embarrassment and defensiveness that comes from showing someone your life and watching them look at it honestly. Elias followed. She circled the forge slowly, both hands on the stone surfaces, reading them the way a blind person reads a face. The stone was cold and rough and filmed with old ash, and she ran her palms along the edges with the methodical attention of a physician examining a patient. She tapped the metal of the old flue with 2 fingers, listening to the specific sound it produced. She crouched down and examined the base, the foundation stones, the joins. Elias watched her and said nothing. There was a focused precision to the way she moved through this examination. No wasted motion. No commentary for the sake of filling silence. She was working, and the work required all of her attention, and she gave it all of her attention without apology. She found the corner of the forge where the foundation stone was carved, stopped, crouched lower, traced something with 1 finger. The letters were worn, barely legible in the fading afternoon light. She stayed there for several seconds, reading, or perhaps just touching. Something moved across her face that was private and complex and not meant for him, and she allowed it to move across her face without trying to prevent it, and then she put it away somewhere inside herself. She stood, turned around. "The bones are good," she said. Her voice was the same, steady. The thing that had moved across her face had not touched her voice. "The bellows are ruined. The flue needs work on the east side, but the forge itself," she paused, "it is salvageable." "I'm not a blacksmith," he said again. "I never learned the work, I know." She looked at him steadily, with the eyes that had flecks of amber in them that he had noticed, and told himself to stop noticing. "I am." They ate supper in the quiet of a first night in a strange arrangement. The cabin was not large. 1 main room serving as kitchen and living space both, with the bedroom behind a closed door and a stone fireplace on the north wall that he had built himself in the first winter and been grateful for every winter since. The table between them was rough-hewn, 2 chairs that did not match, 1 lamp turned low because lamp oil was not a thing to waste, beans and salt pork, which was what he had. Simple food, honestly made. He did not apologize for it. She did not look like someone waiting for an apology. She ate with the careful efficiency of someone who had been hungry for a while and was pacing herself now that food was available, not wanting to reveal the full extent of what the journey had cost her. She held her coffee cup with both hands around the sides, rather than the handle, absorbing the warmth directly through her palms. Her hands were the hands of someone who had done real work for real years, and still the cold found them. She was thinner than her size suggested. All that height, all those broad shoulders, and underneath it, the structure of someone who had been hollowed out somewhat by a very long journey and insufficient provisions at every stage of it. The trip from Copenhagen. The weeks crossing the Atlantic. The train across an enormous country to a territory that still felt, to most of the people who had not lived their whole lives in it, like the edge of something rather than the middle of it. "Your father," Elias said, because the silence had started to feel like a question waiting to be asked, and this seemed like the right question. "You learned from family, you said." She looked up. "My father. Lars." Something moved across her face. briefly. He was a master smith in Copenhagen. The best in his district, probably. Started teaching me when I was 12. She turned the cup slowly in her hands. He said I had the patience for it, that most people strike too soon. You have to wait for the metal to be ready. You cannot hurry it. You can only pay attention to it. When did he pass? When I was 21. She said it simply, without the weight that people sometimes put on such statements when they are waiting for sympathy, just information. I managed for a few years on my own. Then the money ran out. Then she lifted one shoulder and let it fall. Then the fire spoke. Outside, wind, the distant sound of goats settling. Why Montana, she asked. It was far enough. She looked at him like she understood exactly what that meant, and was not going to ask him to explain it. What happened to your first wife? She asked instead. He'd expected it. It still landed with weight. Clara. She left 3 years ago, went to Denver, married a man who owned a sawmill. I'm sorry, she was right to go. A pause. Then Ingrid said, carefully, was she? I couldn't give her what she wanted. And what was that? He thought about it the way the question deserved. Safety, he said finally. The feeling that tomorrow was going to be all right. That we weren't always one bad season away from losing everything. He looked at the fire. I kept trying to give her that and kept failing, and eventually she stopped waiting for me to manage it. Ingrid was quiet. Then, what did you give her when it was good? He blinked. Nobody had asked him that before. I was present, he said, working toward honesty rather than self-defense. I paid attention. She'd say something in the morning, and I'd still be thinking about it that evening. Small things, but I noticed them. He paused. I'm not certain that was enough. It might have been, Ingrid said quietly. For the right person, she stood, moved her cup to the basin. Back to practical. I'll take whichever sleeping arrangement you need me to take, she said. I don't require much space. The bedroom is yours. This is your home. And you are my wife, he said it simply, without weight or implication. Take the bed. I've slept on harder floors than this one. She looked at him for a moment with that measuring expression. The one that was looking for the angle, the clause, the part where this stops making sense. There isn't one, he said quietly. No angle. I'm just a man who spent his last $2 on faith and would prefer not to ruin it on the first night. Something fractional shifted in her expression. A softening too small to describe but too real to miss. Good night, Elias, she said. Good night. She closed the bedroom door quietly behind her. He stood in the firelight and listened to the small sounds of her settling into the unfamiliar space, the trunk opening, the rope bed creaking as it accepted her weight. A long, slow exhale that traveled through the wood of the door and filled the whole cabin with something that had not been there before. Outside, Montana went dark and enormous and full of cold stars. He stood for a while. The cabin did not feel empty. For the first time in 3 years, it did not feel empty. Morning light was honest in a way afternoon light never was. It showed everything. Elias was already up when she emerged, had coffee on and bacon slicing, his hands occupied because his hands needed to be occupied. He heard the bedroom door and looked up. She was better and worse in the morning light simultaneously. Better because she had slept, really slept, and some of the hollow exhaustion had lifted from her features. Worse because the unforgiving early sun showed precisely how thin she was, how far the journey had taken her from herself. I should be doing that, she said. Doing what? Cooking. She stood in the doorway. That's part of the arrangement. He flipped the bacon. Considered, Ingrid, her name felt different in his mouth than other names, like it had a specific gravity. I did not buy a servant. Then what did you buy? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. He could tell from the small tightening of her jaw after, the awareness that it had landed harder than aimed. He looked at her directly. I don't know yet. How about we figure that out together rather than you assuming the worst of me before we've finished the first morning? She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it. That's fair, she said. I apologize. No need. Sit down. She sat. Over breakfast, over 2 cups of coffee, with the morning sun moving across the table between them, she laid out the plan she had been building since before he woke, the forge. The strategy, all of it, organized and sequential, the presentation of someone who has been drafting in their head for hours and is now ready to deliver. Silver Creek, she said. 20 miles north. A silver mining camp, expanding quickly. They consume tools continuously. Picks, shovels, nails, hammerhead, horseshoes, drill bits, wedges. Things that break under hard use and require replacement. Things they are currently importing from back east at considerable premium. Because there is no reliable local supplier. I know Silver Creek. Then, you know they are paying for the distance as much as the goods. And you can make those tools. I can make those tools. The forge is salvageable. We need $45, perhaps $50, for new bellows, coal, some brickwork on the flue, and replacement of the damaged tools. With that investment and 90 days of work, we can reach $600. He looked at her across the table. You worked this out on the wagon ride here, most of it. The forge confirmed the rest. She said it without boastfulness, just accuracy. The statement of a person reporting a fact about themselves without false modesty and without performance. He thought about the 3 years since Clara left, the fence posts he'd had let rot, the roof he'd watched leak every winter, the mending he'd put off and put off and put off until putting it off had become its own habit, its own form of daily life. He hadn't been unable to fix those things. He had the skills and the time and the tools. He had lacked the reason, the force that gets you off the chair and onto the roof. The thing that makes the distance between knowing something needs doing and actually doing it crossable. He looked at Ingrid Voss across his kitchen table, who had added his name to hers without hesitation and was now laying out a plan that might save everything with the same directness she'd applied to everything else so far. All right, he said. She looked up. We fix the forge, he said, and then we fight. Something moved across her face. Not a smile. Something smaller and more careful. The beginning of the thing that comes before you allow yourself to believe something might be real. Good, she said. They pushed back from the table at the same moment. The coalition took 3 days. Elias rode, knocked on doors, explained the situation with the directness that comes from not having time for anything else. Ignacio Reyes listened from his porch with the patience of a man who had been waiting for someone to say a specific thing out loud. Dark eyes, slow nod. 70 years of experience with difficult land and difficult men. $20, Ignacio said. He counted it out deliberately, each bill placed on the porch rail with care. You pay me back when you can. No interest. Just, he looked toward the direction of Crane's property, beat the man. Sable Many Horses met him at the door of her cabin with the expression of someone who has not yet decided whether to be hospitable and is taking her time with the decision. She had 3 sons behind her, young men in their 20s with their mother's watchful eyes and her considerable physical presence. $15, she said when he'd finished, and my boys will help repair the forge. They learn by doing. She looked at him with the steadiness of someone who has made decisions before under more difficult circumstances than this. Don't waste this. I don't intend to. Intending and doing are not the same thing. Mr. Holt. No, ma'am. They are not. She studied him for another long moment. My eldest, she said. Running Bear. He doesn't talk much, but he works harder than anyone you've seen. Then he'll fit right in. Elias said Gus Hartley was last, a smaller operation than it had been before Crane took the northern portion 2 years back. Gus was thinner than he should be, had the look of a man who has lost something significant and not yet found a way to fill the space it left. His cabin was neater than you'd expect from a man living alone, the neatness of someone who maintains things as an act of will rather than of pleasure. He listened to Elias's explanation, standing in the doorway, not inviting him in, but not turning him away either. His expression throughout was the expression of a man receiving information he has been waiting to receive. $10, Gus said when Elias finished. All I've got that's liquid. But it's yours, Gus. I can't take. I want Crane to lose something, Gus said, quietly. The way a man says something he has been thinking for 2 years and is finally saying out loud. Just once. I want to be in a room, or close enough to one, when he loses something. He took the $10 from his shirt pocket and held it out. That's worth $10 to me. That's worth everything I've got right now. Elias took the money. Thank you, he said. Gus shook his head once. Like thanks was not the point, and possibly beside it entirely. You going to tell me it's going to work? Gus asked. No, Elias said. Good. Gus looked at the $10 in Elias's hand. At least you're honest about it. $70 total. More than enough to start when Elias returned. Ingrid was not in the cabin. He found her in the forge, already at work, making a list in small, precise handwriting in the notebook she'd produced from her trunk. Moving through the space with the focused certainty of someone who knows exactly what they are looking at and what it requires. He sat on a hay bale and watched her. She moved differently here. In the cabin, she was careful, tentative in the way of someone navigating unfamiliar territory. In the forge, she had no hesitation at all. Every motion purposeful, every examination thorough. Like the whole architecture of who she was clicked into place the moment she stood in front of iron and stone. $70, he said. She looked up. Good people, he said. She nodded once, went back to her list. He watched the afternoon light move through the gaps in the barn wall and thought about $2 silver and what they had actually purchased, and whether the math was as simple as it appeared or far more complicated than he was prepared for. Because the math said $70 borrowed, 600 owed, 90 days to bridge the gap with iron and heat and whatever Ingrid could make and whatever the mining camp was willing to pay. That math was frightening but graspable. But the other math, the math of 2 strangers in a cabin in Montana who had somehow, in 48 hours, constructed the beginning of something that functioned like a partnership and felt, tentatively, like more than that. The math of what it meant that he had woken up this morning thinking about what she would say at breakfast before he thought about any of the practical problems of the day. The math of the way she had added his name to hers without being asked and not commented on it, and gone to sleep in his house like it had always been hers. That math was considerably more complicated. He was beginning to suspect, far more complicated than he was prepared for, and also, he thought with the particular terror of someone who has not felt this way in a long time, and is not certain they are still capable of surviving it, possibly the best kind of complicated there was. On the 4th morning, the forge was ready, not perfect. The flue had a slight lean to the east that Sable's sons had done their best with, but could not fully correct without materials they didn't have. The new bellows were cobbled together from leather and borrowed wood, and the youngest Many Horses boys considerable mechanical ingenuity. The rebuilt chimney was functional, which was what mattered. But ready. Ingrid stood before it in the cold morning air. Sable's 3 sons stood to one side. Ignacio was there, leaning on the fence post he'd been leaning on since sunup. Gus Hartley had ridden over without explanation, as if he'd simply known this was the morning, and that being present for it was the right thing. Elias stood and said nothing, Ingrid picked up a piece of iron stock from the pile they had assembled, placed it in the cold forge, set the coal around it carefully, building the configuration she wanted, reached for the flint. Struck it. The spark caught small at first, the way all significant things begin. Then the coal began to glow, to breathe, to wake up after however many years it had been sleeping inside a dead forge on a hill in Montana. Heat rose. She worked the bellows with the steady, even rhythm of someone who has done this 10,000 times and whose body knows the motion before the mind directs it. The fire climbed. Orange then, white orange then, the particular sustained brightness that means a forge is truly alive. She waited. Her father's voice, years ago. You wait for the metal to tell you it's ready. You cannot hurry it. You can only pay attention. When the iron glowed, she lifted it with tongs and set it on the anvil, picked up the hammer. It was old, the handle replaced at some point by a previous owner, slightly different wood from the head, but it fit her grip as if it had been made for her hand specifically. She raised it and brought it down. The sound cracked across the yard and up the hillside and out across the valley in all directions at once. Clean and sharp and absolute, the sound of something real beginning, again and again. Each strike precise, each angle deliberate. The iron responding, yielding, taking the shape she was asking it toward. Nobody spoke. Elias found he couldn't. He had seen skilled work before. Men who were good at their craft, doing difficult things with the economy of long practice. But this was something else. This was a person who had been built for a specific thing and was doing that thing. The focus on her face was total. She was not performing for the audience that had assembled around the forge. She was not aware of being watched. She was working, and the work required everything, and she gave it everything. She finished the horse in 22 minutes, plunged it hissing into the water bucket, lifted it out, and turned it in the morning light. Perfect weight, balance, the specific curve of something made by someone who understood what it was for. She hit it on the edge of the forge, looked up, found his eyes across the small distance. Well, she said. He had thought of a dozen things to say and discarded all of them. Let's make more, he said. She almost smiled, not quite, but almost, and Elias Holt, who had stood in a dark field 5 nights ago with 2 cold silver dollars and 3 years of nothing behind him, and no particular reason to believe tomorrow would be different from any of the days before, felt something shift in his chest, small, careful, real the way a fire starts, not with the big flame, with the first spark catching and holding long enough to mean something. He looked around at the small group assembled by the forge, Ignacio, who had been watching with his arms crossed, and the quiet expression of a man who has seen many things and found a way to remain moved by them. Sable's 3 sons, Running Bear and his brothers, who had worked 2 days on this forge and were now standing in the morning light that was the result of that work. Gus Hartley, who had given $10 and a piece of his grief and was standing very still, as if afraid that moving would disturb something, and Ingrid, setting the finished horseshoe down on the edge of the forge, picking up the next piece of iron stock. Beginning again, he thought about Lars Voss. He didn't know he was thinking about Lars Voss. He didn't know Lars Voss yet, didn't know the name or the story. But he was thinking about whoever had built this forge, whoever had worked this stone into the shape of a working thing, whoever had stood where Ingrid was standing now and done what she was doing. He did not know yet what he would come to know, but he looked at Ingrid's hands on the iron and thought, someone built this well. Someone built this to last. The hammer came down again and again, the sound carrying across the valley and into the morning. We are here, the sound said. We are still here. Part 2. Iron does not break. Easy. The first week was good, That was the thing nobody warned you about hope. It arrived generous, all warmth and forward momentum and the particular energy of people who had decided to fight and had not yet fully discovered what fighting costs. 20 items the first week. Horseshoes, nails, hammerheads, a full set of drill bits for the Silver Creek foreman, a weathered man named Cutler who turned each piece over in his thick fingers like he was reading information written in the metal itself. Quality work, Cutler said. Yes, Ingrid said. Just that. The way you confirm something that is simply true. We need more. We'll have more. She rode back to the ranch with payment folded in her coat pocket and something in her posture that Elias had not seen before. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter than pride, more like alignment. The feeling of a person doing the thing they were made for in the place they are supposed to be doing it, and the body recognizing this and settling into it. He noticed. He kept noticing things about her and telling himself to stop and then immediately noticing something else, which was becoming a pattern he did not have a name for and was not entirely certain he wanted to name. 25 items the second week. The money jar on the mantel gained weight. Slowly, painfully slowly, but gaining. There was a particular ritual to weighing it. He did not count the coins every day. That felt like the kind of obsessive monitoring that drove men toward despair. But every few days he would lift the jar, just feel its weight in his palm. And each time it was heavier than the last time. Not by much. By enough $100, he lifted the jar on the night they crossed 100. Set it back down on the mantel shelf. Stood looking at it. Ingrid came in from the forge with soot on her forearms and her hair damp at the temples from the heat. She looked at him standing there looking at the jar. "How much?" she asked. 102. She nodded once. Went to wash her hands. "Good," she said. From the basin, not looking at him, just the word, dropped into the room. But he heard it the same way he heard the ring of the hammer on good iron. Clean and certain and exactly what it was. Then Crane moved. It started with the coal Tuesday morning. Elias rode into Silver Falls for the weekly order. Walked into Dawson's supply with the ease of established habit, and found Dawson at the door with the expression of a man who has been rehearsing an uncomfortable conversation, and is discovering that rehearsing, it did not make the actual conversation easier. "Can't sell to you," Dawson said, looking at the wall beside Elias's left shoulder. "I'm sorry, Holt. I've got my own situation to consider. Whose orders?" Dawson's jaw worked. Did not answer. Did not need to. The ride to the next town was 30 miles into a headwind that had genuine opinions. The supplier there charged double without apology. Elias loaded the wagon in the dark, drove home through cold that had teeth in it, arrived back at the ranch past midnight. Ingrid was still at the forge. Of course she was. She looked up when he came in. Took one look at his face, then at the reduced load in the wagon. He cut the coal supply. She said, "Yeah, how much more did it cost?" He told her. She was quiet for exactly the amount of time that calculation required. Then she turned back to the anvil and raised the hammer. "Then we make every piece count," she said, and brought it down. End of discussion. The rhythm of those weeks settled into something almost mechanical in its regularity. Mornings, Elias handled the goats, checked the fences, hauled water, did the 100 small maintenance tasks a ranch demands, whether or not you have time for them, whether or not you have any particular reason to care about them beyond the immediate necessity. Afternoons, he became Ingrid's second pair of hands. He had not expected to learn anything. He was 35 years old, had been working with his hands his whole life, and carried a certain quiet confidence in his own physical competence. But watching Ingrid work was a lesson in the distance between competence and mastery, and the lesson was delivered without condescension. She didn't explain. She showed the angle of the hammer at the moment of impact. Not straight down, but slightly forward, so the energy transferred into the metal rather than absorbed back into the arm. She demonstrated it once, watched him try, adjusted his wrist with 2 fingers without comment, watched him try again. He started to understand the rhythm of it, the way the metal communicated readiness if you were paying attention. Soft and muddy when it was too hot, crisp and responsive when it was right. She had told him this in words the first week, and he had nodded and not fully understood. Now he felt it in his palms when he assisted her. "You're learning," she said one afternoon, not as a compliment. As an observation, slowly. Everyone learns slowly at first. Then all at once she turned the iron in the coals. "My father said, the forge teaches patience to people who believe they already have it. Did you believe you had it at 12? "Absolutely." The faintest trace of something that might have been humor crossed her face. "I struck the first piece too soon, 6 times in a row." My father said nothing. Let me waste 6 pieces of iron. Then asked me what I had noticed. "What did you say?" "That I had been impatient." She pulled the iron out, glowing perfectly. He said, "Good. Now you know what impatience costs. Don't forget the cost." She set the iron on the anvil, raised the hammer. Elias pumped the bellows and said nothing, and thought about all the things he had done too soon in his life, and all the things he had waited too long for, and wondered, for just a moment, which of those categories she fell into. He stopped that thought immediately. The money climbed $120, $140. Each number was a small argument won against something larger and less fair than arithmetic. Not the whole fight, just 1 point at a time. But the points accumulated and the jar on the mantel got heavier, and the deadline got closer, and the math, while still frightening, was no longer impossible. Evenings, after the work wound down, and the others had gone home, and the forge coals had been banked for the night, they ate together. These meals had become something Elias looked forward to with a care he did not apply too closely. There was nothing remarkable about them on the surface. Beans, mostly. Salt pork when they had it. Bread that Ingrid made on Sundays in large batches. Dense, good bread, the kind that sustained you through long, cold days, that she produced with the same focused precision she applied to the forge work. She did not vary the recipe. She did not ask whether he wanted it differently. She made it the way it should be made, and it was good, and that was the end of the matter. He had come to look for the bread the way you look for things that mark the shape of a week. Sunday was bread day. Monday was when the fresh bread was still soft enough to be remarkable. By Thursday, it was better toasted. By Saturday, you were looking forward to Sunday again. This was what a life felt like when it was working, when it had rhythm. What was remarkable was the quality of the time itself. Sometimes they talked. Seriously, about the work, the orders, the inventory, the math of what they needed to produce, and what the market at Silver Creek would bear. And sometimes about other things. She had asked him once, over beans in the second week, what he had thought Montana would be when he came here. He had answered honestly, and she had listened with the quality of attention that was one of her specific gifts, fully present, not waiting for her turn to speak, but actually taking in what he was saying. And sometimes they didn't talk at all. They had found the comfortable silence of people who do not need noise to feel connected. He would read whatever he had. She would work in the small notebook she carried everywhere, sketching tool configurations in quick, precise lines, writing calculations in the margins in a hand so small it looked like a code. The fire would talk to itself. The goats would offer opinions from the pen outside. Occasionally, Bess the mule would register some external event of concern, Sybil. Ordinary. The shape of a life that was beginning to feel, tentatively, like something he had not had in a very long time, and had stopped expecting to find. He tried not to name it. Naming things made them real. And real things could be lost. He had lost enough real things to have developed a certain caution around naming. The second disruption came from a direction he had not anticipated. Cormac Finlay showed up on a Thursday afternoon, arriving in the yard on a horse that had seemed better years, dismounting with the careful movements of a man whose body was operating on insufficient resources. He was perhaps 42. Thin in the way that comes from not enough food over too long a time, rather than natural build. A laborer's hands, the knuckles scarred from years of physical work. The posture of someone who had been folding inward for months and was making a deliberate effort this morning to stand straight. His hat was already suffering in his hands. "Holt," he said, not quite meeting Elias's eyes. "Name's Cormac Finlay. I heard what you're trying to do out here. Thought maybe I could help." Sable materialized in the barn doorway. She had an uncanny ability to appear exactly where something was happening, and Elias had long since stopped being startled by it and simply accepted it as one of her properties, like her precision with a rifle or her comprehensive knowledge of every medicinal plant in the territory. She stood beside him. Her face was the flat, observational expression she wore when she had already reached a conclusion and was watching to see if events would confirm it. "I know this man," she said. Factual. No inflection. "He hauls timber for Warren Crane." "Has done for 2 years, hauled," Cormac said. Past tense. Why past tense? The man was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that has weight in it, my wife, Eleanor. He turned his hat in both hands. Over and over, the brim describing circles. "She's been sick 6 months. Lung fever. Crane told me he'd get her medicine from Denver. Real medicine. Said it was part of what I was owed for the timber work. I did 3 months of jobs for him. Jobs I am." He stopped. Started again. "Jobs I'm not proud of." Nobody spoke. "Last month I found out what he'd been giving her." Cormac's voice went flat and very precise. The flatness of someone controlling something with considerable effort. Colored water, mixed with something that smelled chemical. He'd been giving me colored water in medicine bottles for 3 months. My wife has been getting worse, and I have been thanking him for his generosity. The hat was beyond rescue now. Elias looked at Sable. She was looking at Cormac with the measuring expression of someone who is willing, provisionally, to extend something adjacent to trust, and who wants the person receiving it to understand it is provisional. "Where is she?" Sable asked. "Our cabin." 3 miles east on the creek road. "She can't travel. I'll go," Sable said it to Elias, not to Cormac. If she is sick the way he says, then this man is not our enemy. He is another person Crane used and discarded. Elias looked at Cormac Finlay for a long moment, matching for the trap, the angle, the version of this that was Crane playing a longer game through a proxy. What he found instead was a man so completely emptied out by guilt and grief that there was genuinely no room left for anything as purposeful as deception. You cannot fake that particular kind of hollow. "Stay," Elias said. "Work. We find out what's true, then we decide." The relief that moved across Cormac's face was total and unguarded and almost painful to witness. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me." "Pick up that shovel." Cormac picked up the shovel. Ingrid had been watching from the forge doorway. When Elias came back inside, she didn't comment on what had happened. Just worked. Iron. Heat. The hammer finding its rhythm. He stood at the bellows and pumped and let the silence run its natural course. Then, he's telling the truth. Sable hasn't confirmed yet. It doesn't change the truth. She turned the iron in the coals. There is a specific way a person stands when they have run out of things to protect. Like they are carrying something very heavy, but they have already decided they will not put it down. Because putting it down would mean admitting how long they've been carrying it. Elias pumped the bellows. Let that sit in the air between them. You've stood that way, he asked. She was quiet for a moment. On the boat, from Copenhagen, she said. About 4 days in. The sea was very bad, and I was the only person in steerage who wasn't ill, which just made everything lonelier. She pulled the iron out, glowing the right color. I sat on deck one night when I wasn't supposed to. Very cold, and I thought about the water. He went still. Not seriously, she said. Just as a thought you have when you are very tired. Like opening a door in your mind to see what is on the other side. What closed the door? Curiosity. She set the iron on the anvil. I did not know how the story ended, and I found I could not stop caring about that, even then. Even very cold and very tired, with 43 cents and nowhere to arrive, she raised the hammer. Some part of me just needed to know how it ended. Not foolish, Elias said. She brought the hammer down. Neither of them spoke for a long time after that. Sable returned by evening. She came in, washed her hands at the basin, accepted coffee, drank half of it in silence. Eleanor Finley is genuinely ill, she said. Lung fever, yes, but also malnourished, and whatever compound Crane gave her has caused additional inflammation in her chest. She has been suffering without adequate treatment for months. A pause. She can be helped. I have the plants and the knowledge. It will take time. Weeks. She looked at Cormac then. Directly, I am going to help her, Sable said. Not because of anything you have done. Because she has done nothing wrong, I know, Cormac said. You will haul wood for everyone here this winter. All of it, yes. And you will tell us everything you know about Crane's operations. His men, his routes, who he has purchased, who he has merely frightened into compliance. A longer pause. Yes, Cormac said. Everything. What Cormac knew was considerable. The patrol routes Crane's men ran, and when they rotated, which county commission members were paid, and which were simply afraid. 2 other families being pressured in variations of the same scheme, the Aldermans south of town, the Pruitts east of the creek, and the fact that someone had been watching the road to the ranch since the 2nd week. He knows about the forge, Cormac said. How much? That you're producing, that you're selling to Silver Creek, that you're within reach of the payment. He looked at the floor. The first 2 pieces I gave him myself, before Eleanor. Before I understood what he'd done to us, Ingrid spoke before Elias could find words. It's done, she said, not harshly, with the particular finality of someone closing a door on something and meaning to keep it closed. What matters is what we do from here. He's planning something, Cormac said. I don't know exactly what, but Crane doesn't let people get this close to beating him without moving. Elias and Ingrid looked at each other across the forge, the look that had been developing between them over weeks, the one that no longer required words for the obvious things. Of course he is, the look said. The question is when. The night of day 14 started the way every bad night did, normal, which should have been suspicious by then, because normal had become the specific kind of calm that arrived right before the storm of not normal. But you cannot live perpetually braced for disaster without becoming something that is no longer a functional person. So you let yourself breathe during the ordinary moments. And sometimes that breathing was when it came. Elias woke to Bess at 3 in the morning. The mule had a specific register for genuine alarm, distinct from her register for general opinion. And this was absolutely the alarm register. He was standing with the rifle before he was fully conscious of being awake. Bare feet on cold floorboards, heart moving ahead of his thoughts. The bedroom door opened. Ingrid. Nightgown. Hair loose. Completely alert in the way of someone who had not been sleeping deeply either. What? Don't know yet. Stay. Don't finish that. She picked up the fireplace poker without pausing in her stride. They went to the window together. 4 figures in the yard. Moonlight. Moving around the forge, with the systematic efficiency of people who know exactly what they have come to do and have done this kind of thing before. Not hurried. Methodical, then the sound, metal on stone, deliberate. Not the sound of trying to break through something, but of someone ensuring something is thoroughly destroyed. Elias raised the rifle and fired once into the air. The crack split the night wide open. The figures ran. Horses already waiting in the tree line, prepared, positioned. This was not improvised. This was planned with the patience of a man who had decided precisely when and how he wanted to cause pain. Gone in less than a minute. Elias and Ingrid crossed the yard in silence. The forge was destroyed. The new bellows, which Running Bear and his brothers had built with such care over the leather tension and the frame construction, had been slashed, not torn, slashed, with something sharp multiple times, thorough. The coal was scattered across the yard, mixed with night dew and mud. The rebuilt flue had been knocked inward, brick dust still settling in the cold air. The anvil had been tipped. 400 pounds of iron tipped over in the dirt. Elias stood and looked at all of it. His hands were very still at his sides. Ingrid stood beside him. Said nothing for a long time. She was doing the thing she did, processing rather than reacting, taking in the full scope before she allowed herself to respond to it. He waited. "We rebuild," she said. "Ingrid, we rebuild." The voice of someone who has made a decision that is not subject to revision. "We don't have the materials for the flue. We don't have time to reconstruct the chimney before. We do not rebuild the same thing." She turned to look at him. The moonlight was specific on her face, resolved, clear. "We build something they cannot find, something they cannot destroy because they cannot locate it." The portable forge took 2 days and 1 conversation with Ignacio to design properly. Ignacio arrived the morning after the destruction with 2 of his nephews and a cart loaded with salvaged materials and the particular energy of a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of problem. "My grandfather," Ignacio said, setting down a length of iron grating on the ground, ran a traveling forge in Sonora for 20 years, set up. Work, break down, move, never permanent, never a target. Ingrid walked around the materials on the cart, crouching, lifting pieces, testing weight and gauge and what each component could bear. "Yes," she said, "this works." They built it in the far corner of the barn. The forge itself portable and quick to assemble and disassemble. The bricks stackable into a working configuration in under an hour, and reducible to innocent-looking building materials in the same time. The coal hidden in 3 separate small caches spread across the barn, covered by hay, no single discovery capable of taking all of it. Cormac, who turned out to have a carpenter's instinct nobody had anticipated, built a false wall in 1 long and determined day. Behind it, tools wrapped in oilcloth, organized with Ingrid's characteristic precision. In front of it, old lumber, the plausible disorder of a barn that had not been recently organized, 8 items per day. 10, if they pushed hard down from 25. A brutal reduction that made the math frightening all over again. But the forge was invisible. And Crane's men watching from the tree line, watching the road, watching the cleared patch where the permanent forge used to stand, had nothing to observe anymore. The money climbed. Slower, painfully. $150, $170. Elias rode to Silver Creek twice a week. Cutler had started saving a specific spot for him at the equipment shed, which felt like a form of recognition that mattered in a territory where recognition was earned through demonstrated reliability, not words. One evening he returned to find Ingrid had reorganized the barn's interior in his absence. Better workflow. The coal caches positioned more efficiently relative to the forge assembly point. The finished goods staging area moved 3 steps closer to the barn door. She didn't explain it, just looked at him when he came in, eyebrows raised. a question that was also a statement about having already decided the answer. He looked around at the new arrangement, nodded once. She turned back to work. He thought about how quickly he had learned to read her. The left eyebrow, the particular set of her shoulders when she was deep in a problem versus when she had already solved it. The specific way she held her coffee cup in the morning versus in the evening. The difference between her thinking silence and her resting silence. He thought about how this knowledge had arrived without any effort on his part, without intention. The way you learn the geography of a place you live in simply by inhabiting it long enough. Dangerous, he thought. He picked up iron stock and got to work. He was not particularly successful at stopping the thinking. Day 30 arrived wearing the ordinary face of an ordinary night, 3 in the morning. Elias awake on his floor pallet, staring at the ceiling, having the kind of conversation with himself that only happens in the small hours when the rational machinery has temporarily stepped out and left the more honest parts running unsupervised. The math, always the math. $170, and the count was slow, and the deadline was not slow at all. And the woman sleeping in the next rooms was working at a pace that he recognized because he had seen Clara reach it in the year before she left. That specific exhaustion that goes past the physical body into the parts underneath. The bedroom door opened. Ingrid came out. She had been awake too. He could see it in the quality of her alertness, deliberate rather than instinctive. She sat down in the other chair, pulled her shawl around her, and looked at the fire without speaking. Neither of them spoke for a while. Outside, wind. The mountains doing what they always did, massive and indifferent. "You're thinking about the math," she said finally. "I'm always thinking about the math, and it's possible. If nothing else goes wrong, if production holds, if the orders continue," he paused. "If nothing else goes wrong, you said that twice. I meant it twice." She was quiet. "Then, what else are you thinking about?" He looked at his hands. The honest answer was layered, and he was not entirely ready to say all of it. But there was something about the specific quality of her attention when she asked a question that made evasion feel like an insult, like she would notice immediately and update her understanding of what kind of person he was. "The mending I didn't do," he said finally, after Clara left. 3 years of it. The roof, the fence posts, the equipment. I knew how to fix all of it, had the tools, had the time, had the knowledge. She listened without filling his pauses. "I just didn't," he said. Like some part of me decided that if I stopped maintaining things, they would eventually reach a stable state of broken, and then at least the direction would be fixed. Nothing could get worse if nothing was still working. Did it work? Things that aren't tended just keep failing. "There's no floor," the fire spoke quietly. Wind outside. On the boat from Copenhagen, Ingrid said, after a silence that had its own shape and weight 5 days in. The sea was the worst I had seen. Everyone in steerage was ill except me, which made everything lonelier. I sat on deck one night, not allowed, very cold, and I thought about the water. She turned the fringe of her shawl between her fingers. Not seriously, just as a door. The way you open a door to see what is on the other side. He was very still. "What closed the door?" he asked. "I did not know how it ended," she said. "The story. I couldn't know how it ended if I stopped. And I found I couldn't stop caring about that." She looked at the fire. Even then. Even when I was very tired and had nothing. Some part of me just needed to know what happened next. He looked at her. "Your father taught you that," he said. "The patience. The waiting. My father taught me everything useful I know." Something private moved across her face. He used to say, "The metal tells you when it is ready. You cannot rush it. You can only pay attention to it." The fire burned low between them, Ingrid said. "I know," she said quietly. He looked at her. She was looking at the fire. But the line of her mouth had changed, something she was managing. Something she had decided about how much to let show. "You know what?" he asked. "That you are trying to decide how much to say." She glanced at him briefly. "You have been deciding for 2 weeks, that obvious? To me. You are not obvious in general. You present a calm surface quite well." A pause. "But I have been watching you for 30 days. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Simply, whatever you are working towards saying, "I'm not going anywhere." He looked at the ceiling for a long moment, then, "I wake up in the morning thinking about what you're going to say at breakfast. Not what we need to do, not the work. Just what you're going to say." He kept looking at the ceiling. "I've been trying to stop doing that, very quiet." "Is it working?" she asked, terribly. Something shifted in her expression. Something that was not quite a smile, but was in its immediate neighborhood. "I design tools at night," she said, conversationally. "Reporting a fact, new configurations, better balance points, modifications. And sometimes I spend 45 minutes on a design and then realize I have been thinking about something entirely different for the last 20 minutes, and none of it made it onto the paper." He turned to look at her. "What were you thinking about?" he asked. She looked at the fire. "Breakfast," she said. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then something loosened in Elias's chest, loosened and rose, warm and unexpected, and came out as a sound he hadn't heard from himself in 3 years. Laughter. Real laughter. The kind that surprises you by happening before you have decided to allow it. Ingrid looked at him. Then she was laughing too. Quietly but genuinely, a real laugh, filling the cabin and pushing some of the dark back to where it belonged. They sat together until the fire burned to embers. Neither of them went back to sleep. Aldous Merritt arrived on day 45, looking like someone who had been given detailed instructions on how to appear reasonable and had prepared extensively. He rode a good horse, wore good clothes. His smile was the smile of a man who had learned through long practice exactly which expression encouraged people to sign things. "Mr. Holt," he said from the yard. "My name is Aldous Merritt. I represent several mining operations across the territory. Word has reached me regarding the quality of your blacksmith work. Elias came out to meet him. Kept his face neutral. What kind of arrangement? An exclusive supply contract. Merritt produced a fuzzled document with practiced ease. 200 items per month. $4 per item. Guaranteed purchase first of every month, regardless of market conditions. $800 a month. The arithmetic happened before Merritt finished the sentence. 2 months paid Crane. 3 months rebuilt everything. Bought time and stability and the kind of breathing room Elias had not had in 8 years. "I'd like my partner to review this," Elias said. "Of course." Ingrid came out of the barn, soot on her hands. The focused energy of someone's pulled from work mid-process. She took the contract without comment and read it, standing up in the yard, which Elias had learned meant she was not planning to be there long. Full read. Every line. She turned a page. Read the back. Turned it again. Stopped. Her eyes moved over one section. Then again. Then a third time. Her expression did not change. But she held very still in a way that was different from her normal stillness. She handed the contract back to Elias and pointed to one clause without speaking. He read it. To Section 7. Subsection C. In the event of non-delivery of agreed quantities, the buyer reserves the right to claim materials and equipment as compensation for breach of contract. Materials and equipment. He read it twice, then understood what equipment could mean in the hands of a sympathetic judge and a motivated plaintiff. The forge, the tools, the barn, the cabin, the land itself. One missed delivery, 1 short week. One act of sabotage, which Crane had already demonstrated, was entirely within his methods, and Crane had everything. Legally. cleanly, without any of the inconvenience of an eviction. He looked at Ingrid. She looked back. The whole conversation happened in that look. Fast and complete. "We need a day to review this, Elias," told Merritt. Merritt's smile held with the practiced ease of a man who knows he has all the time he needs. "Of course. Though this offer does have a limited window, then it has a limited window," Elias said. "We'll be in touch." That night they went through the contract line by line, all 3 hours of it, every clause, every definition, every piece of language calibrated to be just vague enough to be dangerous to the wrong party. Cormac sat nearby and confirmed, when they found things, that yes, this is how Crane operates. That clause there, that definition of equipment, that's not an accident. He's more patient than the sabotage suggested, Ingrid said. Past midnight. Small pencil marks covering the margins of every page. The sabotage was frustration, Elias said. This is his actual method. Cleaner. No evidence trail. We sign this ourselves and hand him everything he needs. We breach once. 1 delivery short, 1 week of nothing, and his lawyer argues equipment means the forge, the tools, the property. She set the contract on the table between them. We can't sign it. $800 a month. I know what we're walking away from. A month, Elias. She looked at him directly. We do not sign it. He was quiet, because it was genuinely hard, physically hard, to turn from $800 a month when they were counting every coin. And part of him wanted to find a way to make it work. To argue, the risk was manageable, but he had seen Ingrid's face as when she found the clause. She had found it because she had been looking for it. Because she had understood from the moment Merritt rode up that something about his arrival, the precise timing, the generous terms, was not coincidence. Crane sent him, Elias said, almost certainly. Merritt may not even understand the full purpose. He may simply owe Crane something, and was asked to present a document. She gathered the pages. Doesn't change what the document is when we refuse. Crane knows we read it, yes, so we should be ready for what comes next. Merritt took the refusal with composure that had a small fracture in it. That's unfortunate, he said. The terms were quite generous. Generous is one word for them, Elias said, a pause. Mr. Holt, Merritt said. Declining this offer leaves you with very limited alternatives. I understand that. Warren Crane is not a man who... I know exactly what Warren Crane is, Elias said. Thank you for the visit. Merritt looked at him for one more moment. The look of a man recalibrating what he thought he knew about the situation. Then he looked at the barn where the forge wasn't visible, and at Ingrid's back as she walked toward it, and at Elias's face one more time. You're going to lose everything, he said, not as a threat. Almost as a statement of fact from someone who has done the arithmetic and reached a conclusion. Maybe, Elias said. But we'll lose it honestly. Merritt rode away without another word. The dust of his horse settled slowly in the still afternoon air. Ignacio, who had appeared during the exchange and positioned himself at a thoughtful, watching distance, shook his head slowly after the dust was gone. $800, he said. Trap, Elias said, still. A long exhale, like something deflating. $800 a month, Holt, I know. I'm not second-guessing you. I just want you to know I understand what you walked away from. I know what I walked away from, Elias said. He looked at the barn, at the door Ingrid had gone through, at the faint sound of the bellows starting up again already, because she never wasted time, never let a difficult moment be an excuse to stop working. I also know what I'd have lost if I'd taken it. Ignacio looked at the barn door too, then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man who has understood something he didn't need to have explained. $800, he said one more time, quietly. But not regretfully. $800, Elias agreed. They stood in the afternoon for a moment, both looking at the barn. Then Elias went back to work. Crane came himself 12 days after Merritt, 6 riders, all armed. A man in a town suit carrying the of a county official who had been told this was routine. Elias came out to the yard. Ignacio appeared from down the hill, unhurried, rifle across his arm. Sable emerged from the cabin where she had been with Eleanor. Cormac stood near the barn. Running Bear positioned himself at the fence line. Crane dismounted with the fluid ease of a man entirely comfortable with his own authority. Halt, pleasantly, always pleasantly, reports of an unlicensed commercial operation on this property. The county has authority to inspect. Inspect away, Elias said. Crane's eyes moved around the yard with the slow attention of a man arriving to collect something he believes already belongs to him. The cleared patch where the old forge stood, the barn, the cabin, the quiet, ordinary appearance of a property that was not, visibly, doing anything interesting. He nodded to his men. They went through everything, the cabin first, both rooms, under the beds, inside every chest, behind the wood stove, along the kitchen shelves. Elias stood in the doorway and watched them handle his belongings with the careful blankness of a man who has made a decision not to react. Ingrid stood beside him, arms crossed, the expression she had worn on the auction platform, the one that gave nothing away, the one that refused to give anyone the satisfaction of a visible response. The barn next, every stall. The hayloft, behind feed bags, along the walls, every corner. Cormac's false wall looked exactly like old lumber stacked against the barn's far wall, because that is exactly what it was, apart from what was behind it. The portable forge was disassembled into components that were indistinguishable from building materials. The coal was in 3 small amounts beneath hay in 3 different corners. 22 minutes. They emerged from the barn. Nothing, the lead man said. Crane looked at Elias. Elias looked at Crane. Nothing on Crane's face moved, but something behind his eyes underwent a careful reassessment. "You're very tidy," Crane said. "I try. The county will maintain an interest in this property. The county is welcome to." Crane looked at Ingrid. She met his gaze, directly, with no more expression than a section of rock face. 40 days, Crane said pleasantly. He remounted. "I look forward to our next conversation. Miss Voss, Mrs. Holt," she said. The pleasantness on Crane's face flickered, one small moment of it. Then he wheeled his horse and rode, and his men followed, and the dust of them disappeared around the bend. Nobody moved for 30 full seconds. Then Ignacio started laughing. It started low and built, and his whole frame shook with it, and he put one hand on the fence to steady himself. Sable's expression achieved something unambiguously a smile, which Elias had not seen before, and which changed her face completely. Running Bear, who had said perhaps 12 words in the entire time Elias had known him, smiled quietly. Cormac put both hands over his face and made a sound that was several things at once. Elias looked at Ingrid. She was looking back at him. Something warm and specific, and unguarded in her eyes, directed entirely at him, and it was so clear in that moment that he forgot to arrange his expression around it. "Well," she said. "Well." He agreed, and somewhere in the middle of everything that was still frightening and unresolved, and had 40 days left to go catastrophically wrong, he felt it again, that settling. Like something clicking into a place it was meant to be. Day 58, late. Everyone gone home. The forge coals banked low in the barn. The particular quiet of a night that has finished its business and is simply continuing. They sat outside. Because the Montana sky at night was the kind of space that could hold large things, and some conversations needed that. "Why did you really bid on me?" She asked it quietly. The question of someone who has been carrying it for a while and has decided tonight that the weight is worth putting down. He looked at the stars. The truth had layers. He had been turning it over for 58 days, and thought he finally understood all the way to the bottom of it. Because I hadn't done anything that frightened me in 3 years, he said. Just survival, showing up. The motions of being a person, he paused. And then you walked onto that platform and everyone in that room was trying to make you smaller and you just refused. Stood there and refused. And I thought, that is the bravest thing in this room. Braver than anything I have managed in years. He looked at the sky, so I bid. Not to rescue you from anything. Nothing as simple as that. More like touching something to confirm it's real. Very quiet between them. I had prepared for no one bidding, she said finally. Made a plan. Decided where I would go. What I would do. Told myself it did not matter. She looked at her hands. That I was past needing anyone to choose me. Did telling yourself that help? Not at all. She was quiet for a moment. And then you bid, and I did not know whether I wanted to cry from relief or from fury at myself for needing it to matter when I had told myself it wouldn't. Elias looked at her. It matters, he said. She was quiet then. I watch you when you don't know I'm watching. I tell myself I'm doing inventory. Checking the iron supply. I'm not doing inventory. He looked at her. She looked at the stars. Her profile in the cold night air very clear, very still. That quality she had of being entirely herself without performing anything. He said her name. She turned. He kissed her, badly at first. Misjudged the distance slightly, which under different circumstances would have been funny, except his heart was moving too fast for comedy. Then she moved, a small deliberate adjustment, and it stopped being miscalculated. She kissed him back, her hands came up to his face. Cold from the night air, calloused from the work. Holding him with the same deliberate precision, she brought to every other thing that mattered to her. Intentional, unhurried. When they stopped, they stayed close. Foreheads nearly touching. Both of them breathing with more effort than the cold night technically required. I've wanted to do that for weeks, she said quietly. Why didn't you? She looked at him from very close. Because I was afraid you only needed me for the forge. He pulled back just enough to look at her properly. Ingrid, I haven't slept past 4 in the morning in 6 weeks. I wake up thinking about what you said the day before. Every single day. It is inconvenient and I would like it to stop. And it shows absolutely no sign of stopping. She stared at him. Then, very quietly, something in her face released. Something she had been holding tightly without fully knowing she was holding it. 6 weeks, she said. At least. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she put her head on his shoulder. Still as that. Just set it there. He put his arm around her, and they sat under the vast Montana sky, and said nothing practical for a long time, and it was the best evening he could remember in years. Day 84 arrived ordinary, which Elias had learned to be suspicious of. But you cannot live perpetually suspicious of ordinary mornings without losing your ability to function inside them. Coffee on the fire. Ingrid at the forge before he finished with the goats, normal, and then the sound he heard from across the yard, not violent, structural. The deep, unhappy groan of brick under stress that has exceeded what it can bear, and then the fast, percussive collapse of things coming down that were not designed to come down. He was running before he finished processing what the sound meant. The portable forge chimney had given way, not sabotage. 6 weeks of heat cycles through bricks that had been stacked for temporary use, not permanent. The accumulated stress had found its limit. The bricks caved inward. The flue collapsed. Coal and ash erupted across the barn floor. Ingrid was on the ground. He was beside her before he knew he had crossed the distance. I'm all right, steady voice, already pushing herself up. I'm moved in time. I'm all right, he checked anyway. Both hands, her arms, the back of her neck, looking for burns, cuts, anything that said she was wrong about being all right. She was right. He helped her stand. They looked at the forge together 6 days before Crane's deadline. $190 short, no forge. He did not say anything immediately, because there was nothing to say that was adequate to the moment, and he had learned, over 84 days, that inadequate words in Ingrid's direction were worse than silence, for the first time in 84 days. The first time since the night the original forge was destroyed, and she had looked at the wreckage and said without hesitation, "We rebuild." Ingrid Voss said nothing, just stood there, looking at it, her hands at her sides. Something very tired moving through her face, the specific tiredness that comes from a body and a mind that have been running past their sustainable limits for weeks and have been sustained by will alone and are now encountering the cost of that. Not defeat. Not entirely, but the neighborhood of it, the edge of it visible for the first time. He had been waiting for this, not wanting it, but knowing it was somewhere out ahead of them. A person could only run on will for so long before the will required replenishing, and replenishing required rest they had not taken and safety they had not had. He stepped in front of her. She looked up, her eyes very tired, but still present. "Still her we sell the goats," he said. "Elias." Her voice was careful. "Those are everything. We load up tomorrow morning, drive to Silver Creek, take whatever price we can get and ride back before the deadline. That's everything you have built here." "No," he said, quietly, without hesitation. "It isn't." She understood what he meant. He could see it arrive in her eyes, the thing underneath the exhaustion, still there, still present, still warm. The thing that had been building for 84 days and had not diminished despite everything. Her eyes went bright for a moment. Then she controlled it. She looked away, toward the mountains, blinked once with careful precision. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Dawn," she nodded. He watched her walk back toward the cabin, straight-backed, measured, still refusing, even now, even with the second ruined forge ash gray behind her and 6 days left, to be small. The walk of someone who has made a decision about how they will move through the world and has not rescinded it, regardless of what the world has done, still standing. He stood in the ruined barn for a long time after the cabin door closed. The coals cooled in the wreckage. The Montana night came in cold and enormous and full of stars that had opinions about nothing, and would be there long after all of this was settled one way or another. Tomorrow was a gamble that might not pay. He would make it anyway, because that was what you did when you finally, after 3 years of having no particular reason, had one that mattered. Part 3. The land always canoe some and sincer. The drive to Silver Creek took 2 days, 2 days of cold and dust, and 38 goats, who had extensive opinions about the pace and direction of travel, and expressed these opinions continuously and at significant volume. Elias and Ignacio rode behind the herd, keeping them moving, keeping them together, which was, as anyone who has attempted to move goats in a specific direction already understands, a project that requires the patience of a saint and the stubbornness of something considerably less holy. Old Bessie led the way. She always led the way. First goat he'd bought 8 years ago, 60 cents, at a county fair from a farmer who'd regarded him with the specific sympathy reserved for men making errors they haven't yet identified as errors. Bessie was ornery and opinionated, and had once consumed an entire ledger book containing 6 months of accounting records that he had genuinely needed. He had never been able to stay angry at her for it. She walked at the front of the herd now with the dignity of an elder who has earned the right to set the pace. Occasionally she looked back at him over her shoulder, confirming he was still there. He was still there. Ignacio rode beside him, in the companionable silence of a man who understood the difference between quiet that is shared and quiet that is simply the absence of talking. On the second evening, camped in a narrow valley where wind came down from the north with genuine purpose, Ignacio poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one over without ceremony. "You love her," he said, not a question. A statement of something he had clearly decided was settled. Elias drank his coffee. "I know," he said. "Does she know?" He thought about night 58, the stars, her head on his shoulder. The specific look on her face when she understood what he meant by "it's not everything." "She knows," he said. Ignacio nodded slowly. "My wife," he said, "before she died. She told me something." He looked at the fire. "She said love is not measured by the easy days. Any 2 people can manage the easy days. It is measured by who stays beside you on the days that are not easy." Elias said nothing. "Ingrid has not left," Ignacio said. "Through all of this, she has not left." "No, she hasn't. Then you have your answer. Everything else is details." The fire burned between them. The goats settled in the cold valley grass. The mountains stood enormous and permanent in the dark, the kind of permanence that puts human problems into a perspective that is simultaneously comforting and uncomfortable. Whatever happened in the next 6 days, whatever Crane did or didn't do, whatever the math allowed or didn't, the mountains would be exactly there, exactly that size, in exactly that arrangement. They had been there before Lars Voss built his forge. They would be there long after everyone in this story was forgotten. That permanence was not indifference, it was just scale. Elias found it calming, the way he sometimes found the goats calming. They had no opinion about the deadline. They had no concept of $600, or fraudulent deeds, or men who wanted timber rights. They just needed to move and eat and be managed, and in return, they were exactly what they were, no more and no less, which was a form of honesty he had always found restful. He thought about a woman sleeping 3 days behind him in a cabin with a leaking roof he was going to fix. He had already decided this. He was going to fix it properly. All 3 spots. In the spring. First, they had to survive the winter. First, they had to survive the next 6 days. He drank his coffee and looked at the mountains and listened to the goats breathe. Old Bessie was watching him from the edge of the herd. He looked back at her. "We're going to be all right," he told her. She blinked. He wasn't certain she agreed. But she didn't argue. Silver Creek hit them like a wall of noise and ambition and the particular smell of men who have decided to believe in something and are working themselves past exhaustion to find out whether they're right. The livestock buyer's name was Garrett, a compact man with a grey beard and the eyes of someone who had spent decades determining the value of things and had reached a professional equilibrium about it. He looked over the herd carefully, walked through them, checked teeth, checked condition, made the sounds of a man in the process of calculating. Elias stood and watched, and tried to read something useful in the man's face, found nothing useful. 38 head, Garrett said. Finally, mixed ages. Decent condition. He straightened. $40 for the lot. Elias heard the number, did the arithmetic before Garrett finished the sentence. $40 plus the 47 from their friends. 87 total. Plus the 190 they already had, $277, 323 short of 600, which was not close. Which was not anywhere near close. They're worth 70 at minimum, Elias said. In a different market, maybe. I've got 3 other sellers this week. Market's soft right now, $50, Elias said. That's all I'm asking. Garrett considered it. 45, he said. Final. Take it or I move on. Elias stood in Silver Creek with 38 goats, and an insufficient number, and Bessie watching him from the front of the herd with her ancient, opinionated eyes. He thought about the land. 8 years of it. The view from the east slope at sunrise, that he had never found words adequate to describe. He thought about the leaking roof he was going to fix in spring. He thought about a forge that was going to be rebuilt, permanent this time, stone and iron, built to last. He thought about Ingrid. Take it, he said. The exchange was quick. Bills counted. Goats transferred. Done. Elias stood at the edge of the Silver Creek camp and watched his herd walk away in the custody of Garrett's hired hands, Bessie at the front, as always. Looking back once over her shoulder at him, she had never not looked back. 8 years. $45. Ignacio stood beside him and said nothing, which was the correct thing to say. He put a hand briefly on Elias's shoulder, just for a moment. The hand of a man who has also lost things and understands that the correct response to a loss is not words. Then they turned and rode back. The ride home was different from the ride out. Quieter inside. The goats had provided constant noise and management, and the specific distraction of caring for living things. Without them, the road was just a road, and the mountains were just mountains, and there was nothing to occupy the mind except the math, which Elias had done so many times now that it ran automatically, always arriving at the same insufficient number, $45, plus 47 from their friends, plus the 190 already in the jar, $282, 318 short of 600, not close. Not even in the territory of close. He had known this before he sold the goats. Had made the calculation before they left. The goats were not going to close the gap. He had known that. He had sold them anyway, because it was the only thing left to do that was not simply standing still and waiting. They pushed the horses harder than was advisable, made it in 2.5 days, arrived at the ranch in the gray pre-dawn hour when the light had not yet decided what kind of day it wanted to be. Ingrid was in the yard before they fully stopped, lantern in hand. She had heard the hooves on the road and come out immediately, which meant she had been awake, which meant she had not slept well, which meant she had been doing the same arithmetic he had been doing for 2.5 days on the road. She came out with the expression of a woman who has spent 2.5 days being extremely productive in order to avoid having to just wait. She looked at his face, read it completely, the way she always read him, without him having to say anything, without him having to arrange it into words. How much? She asked. 45. She did the math. He watched it happen behind her eyes. The quick internal movement of a calculating mind, encountering a number and knowing immediately what it meant. We're short, she said. $13. She was quiet for exactly 1 breath. Then she turned and walked back into the cabin. He followed, and Ignacio quietly took the horses to the barn, understanding without being told that this was a private threshold. On the kitchen table she had laid out everything while he was gone, the money jar, a written accounting of every dollar earned and spent, tools she had been repairing by hand without heat, cold work, limited but still work. She had been trying to find $13 in the margins. I went through every possibility, she said. The tools we don't need aren't worth enough. The ones worth enough we need for rebuilding. Elias sat across from her. They looked at the list together, $13. The specific cruelty of a number, small enough to see where you almost made it. We go tomorrow, he said. We stand in front of Crane. We show him $587, and we ask for 2 more weeks. He won't give them, I know. So we go anyway. We go anyway. Together, she looked at him across the table. Tired and resolved in equal measure. Together, she said. They sat in the kitchens until sunrise. Neither of them slept. Day 90 arrived cold and bright, the kind of Montana morning that is beautiful in exact proportion to how little you are able to enjoy it. Elias stood on the porch. Ingrid stood beside him. They had been awake since before dawn, moving through the cabin with the quiet efficiency of two people who have said what needs saying and are now simply present in what is happening. Ignacio arrived at 8, Sable at 8:30. Cormac last, face grim, having heard through some network of valley communication that the day had come. They stood in the yard together. Nobody offered false comfort. That was one of the things Elias had come to love most about these people. They did not lie about hard things. They stood in them together, which was worth more than reassurance. "He'll come at noon," Elias said. "When the lease expires, then we have 4 hours," Sable said. "To do what?" She looked at him steadily. "To stand here, which is what we have been doing." They waited. The waiting had a physical quality, like standing in water up to your chin. You could breathe. The level wasn't quite there yet, but you were very aware of your own breathing. Sable brewed coffee and brought cups out without being asked. Because Sable always identified what the situation required, and provided it without making a ceremony of the providing, Cormac stood near the barn and said very little. He had his own history with this day. 3 months ago he had been on the other side of this kind of mourning, doing work he was not proud of for a man who did not deserve the doing of it. Now he was here, on this side. The difference between those two places was not nothing. Elias stood on the porch and watched the road. Ingrid stood beside him at some point. He didn't track the exact moment. It happened the way certain things happen, without announcement. She put her hand in his. He didn't look at it, just folded his fingers around hers. Cold morning air, her hand, and calloused and strong. His the same. The specific texture of hands that had been working hard for a long time. He thought about the first night. The way she had signed her name and added his without being asked. He thought about the forge, about her standing at it for the first time in the light of that first morning, about the sound of the hammer coming down, about the night the forge was destroyed and the word she had said, rebuild. About 60, 84, days of iron and heat and the refusal to accept the obvious answer when the obvious answer, sir, was no. He held her hand. She held his. They stood like that. The clock in the cabin ticked the way clocks do, indifferent to consequence, measuring time with no understanding of what the time contained. 10 o'clock, 10:15. A cloud moved across the morning sun, and the temperature dropped 2 degrees, and then the cloud passed, and the temperature returned. The goat pen was empty. The barn was quiet. The cleared area where the forge had stood was just cleared area. The foundation stones visible in the dirt, her father's foundation stones. Though they did not know that yet, at 10:30, a rider appeared from the south, not from the direction of town, a single rider, moving at an unhurried pace that suggested he had not needed to hurry. He was an older man, perhaps 55. Well-dressed in the functional way of someone who wore quality clothes because they were practical, rather than because he wished to make impressions. He sat his horse with the easy posture of a man accustomed to long days in the saddle. He came into the yard and stopped, looked at the assembled group, looked at the cabin, the barn, the cleared area where the forge had stood. Then he looked at Ingrid, Mrs. Holt, he said, formerly Miss Ingrid Voss. Of Copenhagen, Denmark. She looked at him carefully. Yes. My name is Edmund Farrow. I am a land surveyor and title examiner for the Territorial Land Office. He reached into his coat and produced a leather folder. I have been investigating irregularities in property deed transfers in this county for the past 6 weeks. This property is among the matters I have been examining. Elias felt something move through him. Not hope yet. He had learned to be careful with hope. But the possibility of hope, which was its own distinct and dangerous thing. What irregularities? Ingrid asked. Farrow dismounted, opened the folder. Mrs. Holt, he said, I need to ask you about your father, Lars Voss, a blacksmith. Originally of Copenhagen, something changed in Ingrid's face, very small. But Elias was watching her, and he saw it. "My father died when I was 21, she said. "I was told he died in Copenhagen. That is what you were told," Pharaoh said carefully. "It is not what the records show." Very quiet in the yard. Sable had gone entirely still. Ignacio was looking at Pharaoh with an expression that had moved from wariness to something more intent. "What records?" Ingrid said. Pharaoh unfolded a document. Old paper, the specific yellow of age, the careful penmanship of formal record-keeping from 20 years past. Lars Voss departed Copenhagen in the spring of 1867, Pharaoh said. He arrived in Montana Territory that same year. He filed a homestead claim on this property under the Homestead Act of 1862 on the 14th of September, 1867. He met the required conditions. He built a structure. He worked the land. He filed correctly. He paused. He intended to return to Copenhagen to bring his daughter to Montana. He wrote this intention in the claim documentation. Pharaoh turned to the page. Specifically, he wrote, "Property claimed for the benefit of my daughter, Ingrid Helene Voss, to whom all rights shall pass in the event of my death, she being my only heir." The yard was absolutely silent. No wind at that moment. No sound from anywhere. He died on this property in the autumn of 1868. Pharaoh continued, "A forge accident." The county records from that year document it. He looked at Ingrid carefully. "He never made it back to Copenhagen. You were never informed of any of this." Ingrid took one breath, then another. "The forge," she said. Her voice was very quiet, the old one. "That was already here when Elias came, built by your father in 1867. She turned, walked across the yard, not quickly, measured. Like someone moving toward something they need to see with their own eyes, before the believing can happen. She walked to the corner of the cleared area, where the old forge had stood, where they had rebuilt it, where she had worked for 84 days. She crouched down, reached into the rubble at the foundation edge. The original stones, the ones that had survived both destructions, because they were buried slightly in the earth, part of the foundation, rather than the structure above. She brushed dirt away from one of them. Elias had followed. He stood a few feet behind her. He saw what she found. Carved into the stone, worn and weathered, but legible if you knew to look. If you traced the letters with your fingers as she was tracing them now. L. Voss. 1867. He remembered the first night. Her first inspection of the old forge in the dark. The way she had stopped at this exact corner, crouched exactly like this, read something and said nothing, put it somewhere inside herself and carried it for 84 days. She had known, or suspected, or found something she could not explain and could not release. Her hand was flat against the stone now, palm down, both hands. Pressing. "Far var her," she whispered, the Danish words. He didn't speak Danish, but he understood them. Father was here, had built this forge, had died here before he could go back for her, had left her his land without knowing if she would ever find it. Her shoulders began to shake, just slightly. The fine tremor of someone holding something very large. Elias Pruses knelt beside her, said nothing, put his hand over hers on the stone. They stayed like that for a long time. The Montana morning moved around them. The cold, the light, the enormous indifferent sky. Her father had been here, had worked this earth, had built something with his hands in the hope that his daughter would one day stand where he had stood. And she had, without knowing. She had rebuilt his forge twice and made it stronger each time. When she stood, she was steady. The tears were there, and she did not hide them. And she did not apologize for them. She turned back toward Edmund Pharaoh with her chin level and her eyes clear. "Tell me the rest," she said. Pharaoh continued. "The chain of title. Lars Voss dying without a formally filed will but with homestead documentation clearly naming Ingrid as heir. The subsequent legal confusion. The property falling into a kind of limbo that a woman named Sarah Hodge, who had been renting a neighboring parcel, had exploited by filing a claim that nobody had examined closely enough at the time. Crane had purchased the deed from Hodge 6 years ago. Whether in good faith or with knowledge of the fraud was part of what the investigation was still determining. Regarding the homestead's 5-year residencies requirement, Farrow said, anticipating the question. Lars Voss filed a provisional claim with explicit inheritance designation. The territorial court has ruled that provisional claims with named heirs carry inheritance rights independent of the completed residency period. Mrs. Holt's ownership derives from that ruling. What does this mean for the deadline today? Elias asked. It means, Farrow said, that Warren Crane has never held a valid deed to this property. His lease agreement with you, Mr. Holt, was constructed on a fraudulent foundation. The $600 he is demanding has no legal standing. The silence that followed had a different quality from all the silences that had come before it. This one had the texture of something very large shifting somewhere fundamental. He can't take the land, Ignacio said slowly. He has no legal claim to take, Farrow said. This land belongs to Mrs. Holt. It has belonged to her, in law if not in knowledge, since the death of her father in 1868. Sable sat down on the porch steps. Just sat down, like the choice had been made by her body, without consulting the rest of her. Cormac put both hands over his mouth. Ignacio started laughing. That low, building laugh that arrived when something was so complete and so exactly right that the body had no other adequate response. Ingrid looked at Elias. He looked at her and said the thing that had been true for 84 days, and perhaps longer. You've been home, he said, this whole time. You've been home. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them, they were very bright. My father built a forge, she said quietly, and I rebuilt it twice. Twice, she agreed, and something in the way she said that single word carried everything. The journey from Copenhagen, the auction hall, the $2. The first hammer strike on the morning the forge came alive. The night the forge was destroyed, and the morning she said we rebuild, the portable forge, hidden in the barn. 84 days of iron and fire, and the refusal to accept that something was finished before it was finished. All of it in one word, twice. Warren Crane arrived at noon. Precisely. He had a gift for theatre. He came with 4 riders and his lawyer, and the document that he had been looking forward to presenting. He dismounted, looked at the assembled group in the yard. Something in the configuration of them gave him a moment's pause. Not the posture of people about to lose everything. Just standing there. Holt, he said, warm, magnanimous. I'm here for the $600. Or the property, as per Mr. Crane. Farrow stepped forward. Crane looked at him, and whatever he had been expecting. It was not this, Edmund Farrow. Territorial Land Office. He presented his credentials with the brisk efficiency of a man who has done this many times. I need you to examine something. He spread the documents on the hood of Elias's wagon. Crane looked at them. His lawyer looked at them. His lawyer read more carefully. His face changed in the specific way lawyers' faces change when they find something catastrophically wrong in a document they expect it to be simple. Farrow explained it. All of it. Lars Voss. The 1867 homestead claim. The inheritance designation. The fraudulent transfer through Sarah Hodge. The absence of any valid title in Crane's chain. You've conducted this scheme with 6 other families in this territory, Farrow added. The Aldermans, the Pruitts, the Hartleys, who lost their north pasture 2 years ago, the Brennans, the Mercer family, the widow Coleridge. In every case the same pattern. fraudulent or legally defective deeds, manufactured obligations, pressure until the family sells or abandons. Crane had the look of a man who was very good at remaining composed and was discovering the limits of that skill. "I have lawyers," he said. "So does the territory," Farrow said pleasantly. Crane looked at Ingrid. She met his gaze level, direct. The same way she had looked at him from the wagon seat the first day outside the auction hall. The same way she had looked at him during every inspection, every threat, every attempt to make her feel like something less than what she was. "My father built a forge on this land," she said. "Before I knew this place existed. Before I was born into knowing it," a pause, "and then I came here and I built one too. Because some things run in families." Crane said nothing. "I want you off my land," she said, "today. And I want $200 for the damage done to my forge, my tools, and my property." Crane looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the documents. His lawyer's posture said, very clearly, "Pay it." The silence had a shape and a weight. Then Crane reached into his coat, counted bills, placed them on the hood of the wagon. His hand was not entirely steady. He remounted, did not look at anyone. Rode, his riders followed. His lawyer followed slightly more slowly, with the gait of a man who has had a very instructive afternoon. The dust of their departure settled. Nobody moved for a full minute. Then Gus Hartley's voice came from the back of the assembled group. Gus, who had ridden over at some point in the morning and been standing quietly at the back the whole time. "Does this mean I get my north pasture back?" he asked. Farrow checked his documents. "There will be a formal process. But in all likelihood, yes." Gus sat down in the dirt of the yard. Just sat down in the middle of the yard in the dirt like he had been standing for 2 years, and had simply and finally run out of the ability to continue standing. "Lord," he said, "to nobody, to the sky, Lord Almighty," and then the noise started. It was not organized. There was no announced moment of celebration. It simply happened, the way some things do when enough pressure has been building for long enough, and a release valve finally opens. Ignacio laughed until he had to hold the fence post for stability. His nephews joined in. Sable's expression achieved something that was unambiguously, completely a smile, which Elias had never seen before, and it changed her face into something warmer and more open than her usual presentation. Cormac sat on the porch steps with his face in both hands and shook with something that was all 3 things at once: laughter and grief and relief, which was probably the honest and accurate combination. Running Bear let out a single loud sound that startled the remaining barn cats off the fence rail, and then looked mildly surprised at himself. Elias stood in the middle of it all, looked at the $200 on the hood of the wagon, thought about 2 silver coins, cold in his palm, on a night that felt like it belonged to a different version of his life. The math was simple and completely absurd. $2 in, $200 out, plus the land, plus the woman who owned it and had come home to it without knowing, plus these people, this improbable collection of stubborn, good, complicated human beings who had decided that Crane's money and Crane's patience and Crane's legal mechanisms were no match for a community that refused to let one of its own go under. That was the real number. That was what $2 had actually purchased. He felt Ingrid beside him. She had come to stand next to him without announcement, the way she always did things. Just there, shoulder nearly touching his. "It's over," he said. "It's over," she agreed. He looked at her. She was looking at the cleared area where the forge had stood and would stand again, where her father had stood. 50 years before they were born into knowing each other and done the same work and thought it about the daughter he was going to bring here. "He would have loved you," Elias said. She was quiet for a moment. "He built me a home," she said finally, without knowing if I would ever find it. A pause. That is love, I think. Building something for someone even when you cannot be sure they will arrive to receive it. They stood together in the noise and warmth of celebration around them. Two people who had arrived at the same piece of land by entire different and entirely improbable routes, and found each other standing in it. The celebration lasted 3 days. The whole valley came. Ignacio brought food and music, a fiddle his nephew played with more enthusiasm than precision, but compensated for with considerable volume. Sable organized everything, because Sable always organized everything and was quietly magnificent at it. Eleanor Finley came on the second day. Still thin, still in the slow process of recovery, but upright on Cormac's arm, looking like someone who intends to keep getting better and has decided the decision is made. She walked into the yard and looked around at all of it, and then looked at Ingrid with the expression of a woman who understands exactly what was done for her and is not going to be casual about it. "Thank you," Eleanor said. Ingrid looked at her. "Sable did the actual work," she said. "You said it was worth doing," Eleanor said, when Cormac didn't know if it was. "You said so first." Ingrid was quiet for a moment. "It was worth doing," she said. Simply, Eleanor nodded, and that was all, but it was complete. Gus Hartley drank somewhat more than was medically advisable, and spent a significant portion of the second evening explaining to anyone who would listen, and several who had stopped listening but hadn't found a polite way to leave, exactly what it was going to feel like to work his north pasture again. He cried twice. Was told by Sable on the second occasion that there was no reason to apologize for feeling something real. Elias danced. He was not a good dancer. He knew this about himself without excessive self-consciousness. He had the general rhythm and the complete lack of elegance of a large man who learned to dance at 19 in a barn and had not thought about it since. Ingrid was worse. This was a revelation. She was good at everything physical, everything requiring coordination and strength and precision. She could swing a 4-pound hammer for hours without losing her accuracy. She could balance on narrow surfaces and manage awkward loads in tight spaces. She couldn't dance at all. She approached it with the focused determination of someone learning a new metalworking technique, which was not the correct approach to dancing, but was extremely characteristic of her, and she stepped on his foot twice. The second time she looked up at him with an expression of genuine affront, directed at her own feet. He laughed. She laughed. They moved badly together through the fiddle music under the Montana stars, and it was the best dancing he had ever done. "You're terrible at this," he said. "I know," she said. "It's not structural. It cannot be approached structurally. You're approaching it structurally. I'm aware. I can't seem to stop. Try thinking about something else. Like what? I don't know." The forge. She immediately started moving better. He laughed so hard he had to stop. She looked at him. The affront. But the corners of her mouth were doing something she wasn't fully controlling. "It worked," she said. "It worked. I was thinking about the bellows configuration for the new permanent forge. I could tell." "How could you tell?" "Your left eyebrow does something specific when you're solving a mechanical problem." She blinked. "My left eyebrow," she said. "The left one specifically. The right stays still." A pause, apparently processing the existence of this information about herself. "You've been watching my eyebrows," she said. "I watch everything about you," he said. Simply, like it was just a true thing. "Have been for 84 days. She looked at him in the lantern light. All around them the music and the voices and the particular warmth of people celebrating something real. Not things going easily, but people standing together through things going wrong and coming out the other side still standing. "Elias," she said. "Yeah, I want to rebuild the forge properly. stone foundation, proper chimney, the way my father would have built it if he'd had time. All right, and I want to name the smithy after him, Lars Voss and daughter. He looked at her and daughter. He says, he claimed this land for me, she said. The least I can do is put my name on the thing he built it for, he thought about Lars Voss, a man he would never meet, who had come to a strange territory and built a forge on a hill and written his daughter's name into the official record of the land, and then died before he could go back for her. Who had, in a way, been waiting for her all along in the only way the dead can wait. Lars Voss and daughter, Elias said. That's exactly right. She nodded once, then looked at him with something considering in her eyes. And husband, she said, after a pause, if that is something you want to be, properly. With vows we choose ourselves in front of these people, he looked at her. This woman who had signed her name to a contract in a saloon with a shaking hand, and added his name without hesitation, who had looked at a ruined forge and said, "We rebuild," twice, who had carried her father's name carved in stone for 84 days, without speaking of it until she knew what it meant, who danced badly and worked beautifully and watched him when she thought he didn't know, and looked at him with those amber-flecked eyes and saw something worth seeing. Yes, he said. Just that. She nodded once, like it was settled, which it was. The wedding was 3 months later, June, the valley, in the specific green that Montana produces for about 6 weeks a year and spends the rest of the year making you grateful for when it comes. The kind of green that has no equivalent anywhere and cannot be fully described to someone who hasn't seen it. Sybil, which was how both of them wanted it. Not because they lacked belief in ceremony, but because they had already done the real version of this. The version where you find out what a person is made of when everything is difficult and the easy path is clearly visible, and they choose the other one anyway. The ceremony happened in the yard where so much had already happened. Sable stood at the front. The community gathered in a rough circle with the particular intimacy of people who have watched something real unfold over months and are glad to be present for its formal acknowledgement. Ingrid wore a dress Sable had made for her, the color of the Montana sky in the earliest part of morning, just before full dawn, when everything is about to change and you can feel it. A blue that does not have a name adequate to it. The dress fit her perfectly because it had been made for her specifically, for her height and her shoulders and the way she moved through the world. She looked entirely like herself. Miss Spore. Just more so, Elias wore his best shirt and his honest face. He spoke first. "I saw you when no one else was looking," he said. "Not because I'm better than anyone in that room. Because I happened to be looking in the right direction at the right moment. And what I saw was someone who refused to be made smaller by a room full of people who didn't know what they were looking at." He paused. "I've been trying to be worthy of that moment ever since. I don't know if I've managed it, but I intend to keep trying. For as long as you'll let me." Ingrid looked at him, then she looked past his shoulder at the stone forge foundation visible from where they stood. The carved letters, L. Voss, 1867, and beside them newer, I. Voss Holt, 1873. "The daughter who came back, you spent $2 on me," she said, in a room where no one else would spend a cent. She took his hands. "I want you to understand what that bought. Not my labor, not my skills, not someone to be useful." She looked at him directly. "You bought me a chance to find out who I am when someone treats me as though I matter. And what I found out is that I am someone who can rebuild a forge twice in 84 days and drive 38 goats across mountain terrain and read a fraudulent contract clause and love a man who has been watching my eyebrows for 84 days without telling me." A sound from the assembled crowd at the eyebrows, heat in Elias's face. "You bought me a chance," she said. That's all any of us are asking for. Just a chance, she squeezed his hand. And I intend to make the most of it, Sable said the words, and they were married again. For real this time, the years that followed were not easy. Nothing about Montana is easy. The winters were long and had opinions. The work was constant, and the rewards were modest, and there were mornings at 4 o'clock in February repairing fence in temperatures that made you question fundamental life decisions. But they were good years. The forge went up in the autumn of 1873. Stone foundation, exactly as Ingrid had planned it. Proper chimney, a bellows system she had been designing in her notebook for months, modified 4 times before it satisfied her. The sign above the door, Lars Voss and daughter, Smithy Est, 1873. She took 2 apprentices, young men from the valley who had the patience to be taught by someone with high standards and the honesty to tell you when something was not good enough. One of them had a real gift for it, the patience, the listening to the metal. She spent extra time on him, not because the business required it, because that is the right thing to do with a gift when you find it. Elias rebuilt the cabin. 2 new rooms, a proper kitchen, a porch that wrapped around 2 sides with a view of the valley he had never found adequate words for, and eventually stopped trying to find them. He fixed the roof, all 3 spots, properly. In the spring of 1874, he told Ingrid about the promise he had made to himself the night he bought her, standing in a dark field with 2 cold dollars, that he was going to fix the roof in spring. She looked at him from the porch where she was reading. 3 years of leaking, she said. Yes, and you fixed it in 1 afternoon. It's not complicated once you start. She looked at him over the edge of her book. No, she said. I suppose it isn't. She went back to reading. He stood on the newly sound roof and looked at the valley and felt the specific satisfaction of something finally done that should have been done long ago. Better late, that was something he had learned. From her, mostly. From watching someone refuse to accept that a thing was impossible just because it had not yet been done. In March of 1875, their daughter arrived. Elias was present for all of it. Sable was there, calm and quietly remarkable. Eleanor Finley was there, fully recovered, holding Ingrid's hand through the hardest parts. The baby arrived at dawn, small, loud, furiously opposed to the concept of being outside the warm place she had just vacated. Elias held her for the first time with hands that had held hammers and fence posts and livestock, and his wife's hand on a night when they had both been very tired and very uncertain. This was different. This was weight of something that had not existed and then did. The weight of future, of possibility, of everything that could still happen to a person who hadn't happened yet. She looked toward him. Newborns don't truly see, but she oriented toward him, toward warmth and sound and presence, and it cracked him open in a way he had not anticipated and could not have prepared for. Ingrid watched him from the bed with the expression of someone who is very tired and very satisfied and very aware that this moment should be witnessed properly. Hope, she said. That's what I want to name her. He looked at his daughter. Hope, he said. Because that's what started everything, she paused. And Lars, as her middle name. For my father, Hope Lars Holt. He looked at the baby. At the name that contained a man he'd never meet and a word that had cost $2 silver and changed the direction of everything. Yes, he said, because some things are complete in themselves. Don't need addition. There is a porch on the north side of the cabin. It faces the valley, the mountains behind it, the forge visible from the left where Ingrid spends her mornings. The goat pen in the middle distance, 52 head now, the offspring of the original 38, rebuilt and expanded. On quiet evenings, Elias sits on that porch. He sits and watches the light change on the mountains. The specific way Montana light moves, slow and enormous, painting things in colors that do not exist anywhere else in the same combination. Ignacio comes sometimes, sits in the other chair. They drink coffee and say things when they have things to say, and don't when they don't. The silence between them is the silence of old friends, which is a different quality of silence from any other. One evening Ignacio asked, "Did you know? That first night with the $2, did you have any idea what it would become?" Elias thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I had $2 and a bad feeling about the alternative. That's all it took? That's all it ever takes." He looked at the forge where the hammer had gone quiet for the evening. Just enough to try. Just enough to not stop when it gets hard, and someone worth doing it for. Ignacio was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather," he said, "used to say the best decisions look like accidents from the outside, because the people who made them were not calculating. They were just paying attention." Elias thought about a room full of laughter, a woman who would not look down. 2 cold coins in his palm on a dark night when he had no particular reason to believe the morning would be different. He had not been calculating. He had just been paying attention. And what he had seen was someone worth seeing, someone who carried her father's craft in her hands. Her father's name carved into a foundation stone. Her father's land under her feet without knowing it. Someone who said, "We rebuild," and meant it every time. The forge was quiet now, banked for the night, but in the morning it would wake again. The bellows billows would breathe, the iron would glow. The hammer would come down with that clean, specific ring that traveled across the valley and up the hillside and said, "We are still here. We are still making things. We are still standing." From inside the cabin came the sound of Hope Lars Holt. 2 years old and in full possession of opinions she wished to share, explaining something at considerable length to her mother, who was listening the way she always listened. Fully, with the specific quality of attention that says, "You are here. What you are saying matters. You matter." Elias closed his eyes, listened to all of it. The mountains, the valley, the forge cooling in the dark, his daughter's voice, his wife's voice answering, the sound of a life. Built from $2 and faith and the stubborn refusal of 2 broken people to stay broken. He thought about the 2 silver dollars. They were still on the mantel in the cabin. He had not spent them. He had thought about spending them many times. In the months when the money was tight and tight was a generous description of the situation, when the obvious practical thing was to add them to the jar and let them be useful. He had not spent them. Ingrid had noticed this eventually, had picked them up one morning and turned them over in her hands the way he had turned them over that first night in the dark field. "Why do you keep them?" she had asked. He had thought about it, because they're the reason for everything, he said. "If I spend them, they're just $2. The way they are now, they're something else." She had looked at him for a moment. Then she had put them back on the mantel. "The reason for everything," she said. Yes, she had gone to the forge. He had stood on the porch, and the sound of the hammer had come down, clean and sharp and certain. The way it came down every morning, and would come down every morning for as long as she was standing, and the forge was burning, and there was iron to be shaped into something useful. Ignacio's coffee cup was warm in his hands. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky above the mountains. "Still standing," Ignacio said, quietly. Not quite a question. "Still standing," Elias said, from inside the cabin. Hope Lars Holt's voice rose briefly in what sounded like a significant argument with a toy of some kind, and then Ingrid's voice, low and patient and completely attentive, and then quiet, the forge cooling, the mountains standing, the valley settling into evening. $2 and everything they had bought.